My name is Barbara Catherine Bigsby Boyd. I am from Anniston, but I worked in Hobson City for 7 years. I was a classroom teacher and I taught French and English and literature. And the reason I was only here for 7 years, that was during the period in which they began to send us out into integrated situations. So there are a whole lot of things that happened during that period in the 60s.
When I say Hobson City, what comes to mind?
Well, when you say Hobson City, Alabama, I guess what comes to my mind is what it really is, even when I was in high school. I think one thing I haven't told you that come to mind is that I wanted to play basketball. I was tall and thin. And they were playing outside in Hobson. And my mother hadn't quite made up her mind whether I could play or not because they had teams during the summer. But what happened, unfortunately, a goal fell on a young lady. Now I remember that vividly, and because of that, that really shot it. And if I make no mistake, I'm not sure if she lived or she died, but that sealed it for me. And then also it comes to my mind of the Panthers at Cobb Avenue High School playing in my younger days, even before my teaching, was staunch rivals with Calhoun County Training School.
Did your experiences in Hobson City contribute to the success of your career as a politician?
In a sense, everything I did up to that point prepared me for where I am. The most important thing I think that really helped to Pat was diversity. When I left here, I spent my longest high school career at Weaver High School, 15 years, predominantly Caucasians. The fort was open during that time. Um, the county had brought in some portable classrooms until they could build a new school. And so I'd had both of two worlds. I had opportunities to teach in a predominantly Black situation and then moving into a predominantly white situation. I can remember teachers being frightened in the sense of going in that as we discussed it. But this was my position about it. Why be frightened? You're going to teach students, and students are students. And to me, as I told them, we don't need to do anything differently. Now, don't get me wrong in my interpretation. There were some adjustments we had to do. But my opinion is if you knew what you were doing, you just go in and teach. But I had one reservation about it. That was going in one spot that's now in my district that I wouldn't dare call by name because of the reputation it had. And I had jokingly told them that I would not go into that situation, even if I was assigned. And we joked about it, and they said, what would you say to the superintendent if he would send you there? During that period, I said, I would say to that gentleman, you don't want a dead teacher on your conscience. So I don't need to go into that environment right now because I would not survive with me being as open as I was, and with that at that time really being a part of Klan territory in a sense. Not today. Well, it may be slightly, but it is a part of my district. Your question to me was, how did this prepare me? Having contact with all of those and being able to survive and adjust prepared me that I'm able to deal in Montgomery with primarily Black males and a few of us. But it's just the same. You have to learn the system. My thing is, after you're elected, the big thing is knowing who are the power brokers, who are the committee chairs, who can help you to bring the most back to your district. So after running under a party thing, if you're going to be successful, able, and you don't throw it away completely, but you have to learn how to be able to compromise and work together so that you can bring things home to your district, as I have been able to do, and some things, we'll talk about later.
Please explain the history of Maury Quarters.
From what I can understand about Maury Quarters, way back then, there were people intelligent enough, strong enough, who knew how to run for offices. I am told from this story, if I remember it correctly, that when one black got elected, and by the way, it was a part of Oxford during the time I think we're talking about. So when that black got elected back then, what would you think? There were opposition. They didn't want him. So therefore, because of all the course of events and things that happened during that time, they pulled out and to form their own city. But it's interesting as we move on later to learn, although that period, they knew how to do certain things, but somebody in one way or somewhere along the way forgot to follow the steps along as it related to really being incorporated and the things that's necessary for a city. And it could have been, and what, as usual, records could have been destroyed, but according to the state where the records should have been kept, there was no record of where they had been incorporated as they began to apply for some things that was necessary for that. So you still got to give them credit when you think about how far that was back for them to be able. And of course, we are always a group of people, and that's what we need to continue to have our young people to understand, that we came from proud people. We were brought here. And you don't enslave people unless you're afraid of something they have to offer. So it has been always known that among us, we had talent. And even a lot of inventions before we were able to know how to patent and do them came from the minds of Black people. And today, if we could just challenge our young people, all of them to believe and to uphold that tradition that they are from a proud race of people.
What do you remember during your time as an English teacher at Calhoun County Training School?
I remember my first experience with an experienced teacher that I won't call by name, coming in and being young. She taught English just as I did. There was an incident when she wanted the students to come and practice for a senior activity. The students asked me if they could go, and being new, they were sort of rambunctious, all up and wanted to go. I told them, no, sit down. So they said, no, we have to go, and they called her by name. I said, no. Then she came and stood in my door and beckoned for them. And by that time, I was steaming. I said, no, sit down. So she ran to the principal, which was right nowhere from us where that office is now. And she told him that I would not allow them to come. Now, this was the part, had I thought about it then, I didn't even have tenure. I was just coming from down in Opelika. I had only been there 2 years, wanting to get home. When he stood in the door for them, do you know, as a young somebody, I had the audacity to say to him, they can't go today. That's the principal. He turned around, went on back to his office. I never shall forget, by the time the class end period, I was steaming full. So he just beckoned for me to come in the office, and the tears started just coming down. Then I was steaming and mad and crying. And so I sat down, and somebody called him outside. He said, "Why are you crying? They didn't go, did they?" Just like that. But now his wife had taught me English for 3 years. Um, and that's why I have the background that I really do have. And so when he came back, he said, "Okay, just tell me why you didn't let him go." He was very nice, but that was insubordination even then. And I said, "Sir, she did not ask me." I said, "She came, they told me they were going. She came to the door. I didn't let them go. And then you came to the door, which was really wrong, and I didn't let them go." So then he said to me, "Well, they need to go and practice because they're even." I said, "Sir, I don't have any problem, but she must come and ask me." He said, "Okay, fine." She came and asked me. To me, had I not had control, you might say, "Why'd you do that?" I'd been taught in my classes sometime in college, if you don't have control of your students, you can't teach them. It was my belief back then, if they jumped up every time somebody asked them to go, or been as disorganized without respecting me as a teacher, I'd never have control, because anybody who wanted them for anything, it was in my opinion then, you come. Now that's one. I have a friend who just died who was a special ed coordinator, Miss Jennings. I have a lot of memories of her and having kids with special needs, and also with her being in the library, because I always liked books, and sometimes I would take breaks to go on that side where she was. Oh, I remember keeping the scorebook back then, basketball. You wrote them down. I remember coach, and I remember a lot of times sitting beside him saying, "Cool down, coach. You don't have to treat them that way, because they will produce." I remember Mr. Dunn, who was a very, David Satcher always talks about him when he comes back. You know, the ex, whom we have official, he's in Georgia now. I remember students from who feeded in here from Thankful, junior high, who were not that students in Hobson weren't smart and all, but you knew them, that junior high school had good teachers, because a lot of them were honor students. They were very respectful too. So I remember that side. I remember a lot of coworkers, personalities, some you could deal with, you know, some you couldn't, but I was very young then. So I got a lot of experience in learning how to deal with them. And being as I was in personality, I guess I was just lucky to get tenure. I'm going to say this about here. I probably wouldn't have ever gotten tenure as a teacher if I had not spent those years here, because I left Opelika because I wanted to come home. That was my first job at J.W. Darden High School. But when I think about how brazen I was in some situations, if I'd had a different type principal than Mr. Mitchell, and then I think he had respect for me because I always reminded him I was taught by his wife for 3 years. So I was prepared, is when I'm trying to get here, to do what I had to do. But it was just by the grace of God in that, because to get tenure, you have to be employed for 3 years and hired for the fourth in the same situation. And I look back now and think, if I had been in a different situation with a different kind of principal who probably would have resented even that first incident, to me, that was one that was positive, but then it was negative too, depending on how your supervisor or your principal would have looked at it.
What were your thoughts when Calhoun County Training School officially closed in 1972?
As I said earlier, most of us as teachers began to discuss it and wanted to know. That was apprehension, wanting to know where you were going to go and what you were going to do. As usual, we knew that we would have to go. You were pretty close to the year of when it happened, because even after I left, I was among, I guess, the first group to go, because there were still some left after I left, maybe a year or two or whatever. And we talked about how they would pick and choose people. But some of it had to do with what you taught, where they needed people. Some had to do with, now principals had a lot to do with choosing people. I'll tell you about that incident since you asked me. During that time, AEA, Alabama Educational Association, was composed of principals who were in the leadership role. I had always been active in it. So I took a role because it protects teachers. And sometimes when things were being done that should have been done, I spoke out about it, even when we were separated. So when I got a call to come to Weaver High School, when I walked in there to that principal, this is what I said to him. Sir, and not calling names, I said, I know you didn't send for me to come to your school. I said, if you did, you have the opportunity to put me in a position so you can fire me. He looked at me, he said, why do you think that? I said, because you and I had rounds all the time about what was you couldn't do to teachers, what was unfair and all that. He laughed. He said, well, sir, if you think that, you are completely wrong. That's why I sent for you. I shall remember the words. He said, because the way you stood up to me and coming out here, I'm going to have a person that can stand up. All those military people, were coming in here then. And he said, also, you are qualified in the two subjects that I need, which was French and English at that time. And he was exactly right, because some of those militaries came in with attitudes that when they looked at me and all, we were superior enough coming from the South. But then look at me as a black female teaching their kids English, and then they thought my speech patterns or whatever would rub on their little precious darlings, as I called it. And then they didn't know how much I knew about what I was doing. It was interesting to me. They never came in and questioned me about French. It was always some little stupid error in English where the students may have changed a grade or changed a word because they wanted them to make all A's to show that I had made a mistake. Or I may have said something to them that they didn't like, and they came to challenge me on it. But the first out of those 15, I would say the first 3, 4, no more than 5, when you stood your ground as to what you really wanted from them. When they come, I was always polite. Sir, if they remain in my classroom, they will have to do as I say. Now, I'm not going to say that those years were not hard for me. They were, because we went from what was the most hard for me to adjust to was going from a self-contained classroom to an open space classroom. Now let me explain that. In my self-contained classroom, I could control the noise and I could control everything. But when I got to Weaver, the county picked up a system that California and others had disbanded, and that was open classrooms. So you could hear what was going on in all the classrooms around you. It was the nervous it got on me, so I had to just take a little time, because here I am in a different type environment, wanting to have my students all, and then you would hear noise from other people. That was a part that caused me to have to think about teaching. And even I took a year off. It got on my nerves, to a point. But you never know what God is preparing you for. As I look back on all of those experiences and what I have gone for, and as you asked me earlier, they all played a part in me being able, as a Black female, to be able to cope and to do what I have to do today, as it means in the legislature.
Integration caused Hobson City's economic and social decline. Do you agree?
Yes, that was the case because of the fact you were taking some things out of community. A lot of people were resistant to their schools eventually having to close, because that was a part of the community. I think I should go back to 1954 when I was graduating from high school. That was the year that the Brown versus Board of Education came down, the same week, around May 17th. The reason I can remember that so well is that I had prepared my valedictory speech. You had to learn your things during that time. And my teacher came during that week leading up, and she said, "No, we got to change your speech a little bit." And I said, "Why? I've learned all this." She said, "Sit down, Barbara," just like that. She said, "An historical decision has come down. You've got to remember that and challenge your classmates as to what will they do about keeping public education alive 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years hence." She just changed one paragraph at the end. I have never forgotten it. At our 50th class reunion, I was part of the banquet for organizing. I challenged them. Some of them didn't relate. A lot of them did. But that thing to me doing that is public education is what I'm getting to. Even today, you're talking about an impact. The road is getting rough here, even now with attacks on public education as versus charter schools, private schools, or whatever. So because of that impact, now that's a long time. That was 1954. I still within me have a desire to continue to fight for and do the best that I can as it relates to public schools and public education. I hope that answers what you just asked me, because economics, and I guess I should do this a little bit more than that. Economics and education go in. Interested in bringing things into your city? Yes, you've got to have a base, and you've got to have. Once there was across the street over there was a print shop, there was a washer, there were businesses all along on the street. So, yes, when you go into the educational system and you have to think about, yes, economic development and education, they have, because why would someone want to come, when you think about it, to a city if you don't have infrastructure, or if you don't have something? Who's going to buy your goods?